It's almost like a leader has that ability to be able to see what could be and then gather the resources and the people to create something that is better. When you lean into that level of responsibility and that level of commitment, it's a sacrifice that a lot of people don't want.
Welcome to the Tomorrow is Not Today podcast. You've already started to create the life you want just by being here. Designed for you as a business professional so you can be physically, mentally and emotionally healthy, more productive, less stressed and living a life you truly love. My name's Kingsley and thank you for coming on another journey with one of our uniquely qualified professionals. He's been described as the people architect. Rohan's belief is that everyone has an inbuilt purpose and magnificence. And he speaks to individuals and groups in order to draw out their potential. For more than 2 decades, Rohan has taught leaders the essential skills to help them make the leap from someone who is great at their job to someone who is outstanding at leading people. Rohan has a master's in educational psychology, as well as lived experience of leading large teams in fast growth environments and a vast knowledge developed by being privileged to executive coach and train some of Australia's top and most impressive business leaders. Rohan Dredge, thank you so much for joining us on the Tomorrow is Not Today podcast today. So great to have you here, and I can't wait to dig into some of the nuggets you got for everybody.
Yeah, mate, I'm so delighted to be here. Our conversations over the years have just been fantastic, and they're getting better. So, from my perspective, that makes the future bright. And I'm delighted to be with you and your listeners. So thank you.
Awesome. No, thank you. So before we get into some of the things, I want to know who the real Rohan is. Well, we've just found out about what you do to make a living, how you help people and all that sort of thing. But who is Rohan? Tell us more about let's get a little bit personal.
Yeah, look, it's, you always love people reading the bios you send them, right? So it's one of those things that's fascinating. And we've all got the list of things we like people to know and understand about us. But, Kingsley, I think back to a psychometric test my dad did for me when I was 17. He was in recruitment at the time. I was 17 years old. That was a long time ago, right? So that was over 30 years ago. And essentially, that said that my archetype was one that would want to spend time with people, inspiring, motivating, developing, and bringing their best to the surface. And funnily enough, 30 years later, that's exactly what I'm doing now professionally. Now, Personally, it feels much the same. I've been married 26 years to Megan, and it stuns me that time has passed so quickly. And she's just a wonderful, wonderful human. And we have 2 children. Our daughter is 13 and our son is nearly 11 at the time of this recording. And he's just excited about all things Star Wars and various other things that go on. I love people. I'm at the high end of the extrovert scale, so I get in trouble for talking to people in lifts. I chat to people at cafes. I remember names. I remember contexts. I'm probably overly talkative and a little bit OTT at times, depending on who you ask.
Love it.
I'm pretty driven. I've got pretty high expectations of myself and others. And so if I was to fall over anywhere, I can probably lack the kind of grace and tact that a leader needs at times. And depending on if it comes up in this organization, I've that has hindered me at times along the way. So definitely not perfect. Definitely a work in progress. I love sport and exercise. I grew up playing team sports. I'm probably a little less focused on that at the moment, but just from a quality of life and a future investment point of view, certainly where we're living now on the southern Gold Coast, where we're enjoying the outdoors and bike riding and swimming and surfing and paddleboarding.
Perfect place to do that.
Those sorts of things.
So
that's
awesome. That's awesome. Because that's obviously big part of what we do here and what we talk about. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And again, one of the reasons I brought you onto the podcast, because I know that's what you do. And I know the influence and effect that can have personally, business-wise, and with families and things as well. So, no, that's very cool. And I love how you're very self-aware of who you are. You know, the areas where you can fall down and the areas that you're good at. And I think that's incredibly important. And obviously today, this podcast, you being a leadership trainer, consultant, being a leader is really important. You've got to be very self-aware, I think, to do that. So let's jump straight into it. Rohan, what is a leader?
I think one of the most Googled questions by leaders, what is a leader? What's the definition? How do we define it? And I've been heavily influenced historically by people like John Maxwell, Jim Rohn, Warren Benison, Bert Nannis from Stanford, Heifetz and Linsky from the Kennedy School of Government. These people have really shaped what I think about leadership. But John Maxwell said, what's the one thing that you need to know about leadership? And he said the one thing is that there isn't one thing. And I think it's really important to remember that as soon as we try and define it, it will probably escape us by the circumstances and the context we're in. And I think a leader is somebody who can look at a situation, can see what needs to be done to make it better, and gather the resources and the people to make that happen. It's almost like a leader has that ability to be able to see what could be and then gather the resources and the people to create something from nothing, if you will, but to create something that is better. In fact, Bettis and Nana said a leader gets better at the things that are important when it comes to leadership. And the one thing I've noticed, Kingsley, about leadership is not everybody wants to do it and not everybody wants to be it. Because when you lean into that level of responsibility and that level of commitment, it's a sacrifice that a lot of people don't want. And but I think if you pressed me, a leader is able to see what could be, and they can gather the resources and the people to make it happen and create that preferred future.
Mate, I've never heard that before like that. Absolutely love that. That just blew my mind. I've heard a lot of great quotes and things, but I'm stealing that one for sure. That's absolute gold. I love it. Now, that being the case...
Borrow with pride. Yes, it's all yours.
I was thinking of stealing, but borrow, fair enough. That being the case, I remember years ago, there was the talked about with McDonald's, if there was a McDonald's franchise that wasn't working so well, they would go in, the first thing they would do, fire the manager, and then they would go and start working things through from there on. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate or not. I know it was a big rumor going around. You may know better than that. And also that sounds like it fits in with what you were just talking about just then as far as your definition of a leader.
Yeah, look, I think that the whole idea of leadership being the problem and leadership being the solution, which a colleague of mine said a number of years ago, I think is absolutely true. The challenge for leaders is we've got to look at what we created and ask ourselves, do we like it that way? And are we prepared to put the work in to change it? And are we prepared to make the necessary sacrifices and face the necessary challenges that get us to where we need to be? And again, this is why leadership's a contact sport. It's why leadership's difficult. It's why leadership costs you and I something, because we're leaning into the situation that we've either created or inherited, and we've got to make those hard decisions. And so if you walk into a situation, I think the first question you do ask is there a leader here that can make the changes? And my guess is, real or not, those kinds of management decisions get made with the answer being no, because the problem is because of this person. And it's a tough one. It's really hard. I've had to do it in my career, assess people's ability to keep leading, and some of them didn't make it, and it was a real challenge.
It's actually really interesting because obviously this podcast is all about creating the ultimate tomorrow for ourselves personally, but also with our businesses and that sort of thing. And so some people might go, well, why are we doing a podcast on leadership? Well, the reason is because if you don't have leadership, you can't create that in your business, and obviously very personal leadership as well. And I think looking at what you just said, and we talked a little bit before about being self-aware, is as individuals, and if we're going to run a company or an organization or whatever it is, if we don't have the ability to see ourselves and go, is that leader there? Then we've got to do things within ourselves to change. And over time, because you travel a lot, work with all sorts of different industries and organizations, what have you noticed looking at individual leaders as to things that they've had to personally change to be able to become that leader themselves?
Yeah, look, it's interesting that you say that around the purpose of the podcast, Kingsley, because I thoroughly believe that the quality of our tomorrow is directly impacted by our self-leadership of today. And I'm a real believer in that. So I'd actually argue that leadership and self-leadership is a core part of the quality of tomorrow. In fact, we use a phrase, act in a way today that your future says thank you. And you go that those sorts of commitments that we make. Look, it's a big question. Let me focus in on a couple of things. Leadership's changed a lot in the last couple of decades. And the biggest changes, I think, are the changes across the demographic introductions. And you're seeing Gen X, Gen Y, millennials enter the workforce with different expectations around leaders. So if you go back to that we were heavily influenced by military metaphors, command and control. Those days are over unless there's a crisis. And when there's a crisis, someone needs to step up and point us in the right direction. But largely, we're talking about a way of working that's more inclusive, that has a greater sense of relational equity. And a lot of leaders are finding that they're not naturally trained in those areas. And as the CEO of Pragmatic Thinking and my practice leading up to this role, that's what we do. We help teams figure out the way of working that builds that relational equity, that builds that sense of connection to each other, but doesn't shy away from high performance, because people want to lean into doing something that feels worthwhile. They want to lean into something that they are able to go, I was part of that. And it's pretty exciting. And so the number one thing we're seeing is leaders, and this is the one thing, Kingsley, that never goes away. It doesn't matter how much technology, doesn't matter how much AI, it doesn't matter how many interest rate rises or anything that's going on in our world, all right? This never goes away. Leadership is a contact sport and people are at the center. And our people skills and our human skills are the things that we've got to keep working on so that we're as good at that as we can possibly be.
It's really, really interesting you say that. And just going back to earlier, what you said, lining up with that there, is that about it being an equity, but at the same time being strong enough to take the leadership role. Is that something where, like in an organization, you're wanting to be like empathetic with people, but at the same time, they're wanting to see you as, I want to be like that, or I want to follow him or her for a specific reason. I want to follow that. If that's the case, how do you actually mentally, internally, I guess, put yourself in that position? Because it is a pressure to be able to be that person. And then how do you outwork that in an empathetic way?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great and in some ways tense question. The number one thing I reflect on when I hear a question like that is, are we clear on our expectations? There's no doubting in my mind, Kingsley, that disappointment is the gap between expectation and experience. When somebody that works for me has a particular picture in mind of what it will be like, and then it's not like that, they could be disappointed. But have we got the skills and have we had the conversation about expectations? That would be the first thing. The second thing is, Brene Brown says, paint done. Tell me what good looks like. Tell me what we're trying to achieve. Are we clear on that? Do we all know what that is? And have we been asked if we're bought in? Because nothing's more frustrating for a leader to get 90% of the way through a project and have somebody say, I didn't agree with this at the start. And they didn't say anything. But maybe they didn't say anything because we didn't talk to them about it. We didn't bring that about. So expectations, deliverables, I think is really important. And I love to ask two opposing questions. I make them a bit hyperbolic. And I say to people, what would your superpower contribution be to this? And if this was a complete train wreck and it was your fault, what would happen? Right? And I ask people these questions, and we do it in a way that's not accusatory because there's nothing to talk about. We're just talking about the possibility of something. But if we know what's expected, we know what we're trying to achieve, and we have a conversation about our contribution and where we might take it off track, I think that helps us really, really significantly.
Yeah, they're two very, the questions that you ask there, you got to really dig deep to actually get the answers out of that. They're not simple questions, which I guess is part of what leadership's about, isn't it? Digging deep to find the real answers. And like you said at the beginning in your definition, you've got to be able to find those answers, those resources to get you where you need to go.
Yep, that's exactly right.
So personally, as a leader, now yourself, been in numerous leadership roles in rather big organizations, and also then being able to take that experience and your formal education and informal education both into the role that you're in now as CEO of Pragmatic Thinking. Personally, because we talk a lot about physical health here, and that's basically where we start all of our coaching and everything we do with that whole physical aspect. How does that affect you personally in your role as a leader and your ability to be able to keep going with the pressures and things like that at the same time?
Yeah, look, it's as you get a little bit older, you certainly have a little bit more experience, but physically, as you get a little bit older, you can bank the experience, you can bank the lessons, you can bank the wisdom. But if you don't look after your physical, mental, and emotional health, you will pay an extraordinarily high price. And the cost is too great. So I really buy into the mindset around that and the commitment to it. And I reckon I do an average job. If I was to just be really honest, I like cheese, chocolate, and ice cream, and but I equally love endorphins, and so I have this kind of tension that goes on. But I don't ever for a minute won't ever stand in front of people and be this beacon of excellence in that area. But what I know is I've got to do. The intake has to be moderated. So what I eat, what I drink, what I put into my body, whatever's not good for me has got to be moderated or removed as best as possible. I've got to exercise something like 3 to 5 times a week in various forms. I spent a number of years cycling, road cycling. I spent a number of years recently in high impact interval training and loved it. But I've recently moved across to weight training and then some active cardio in the area that I live in. And so I do those things 3 to 5 times a week, and I do them out of the discipline of what they will do for me and give to me. But the amazing thing about exercise, Kingsley, is the more you do it, the more you want to do it.
Yeah, so true.
The chemical makeup of your body kicks in and thanks you for it, and I love that. I'm a dad of 2. We waited to have children in our marriage, so my kids have been growing up while I've been in my 40s, and so I have to work harder physically to have more energy and more strength. When you're growing. 10-year-old son just launches himself without telling you and lands on your neck. You've got to be able to hold 40, 50 kilos with a bit of momentum. And so that's a motivating factor for me as well. And to be honest, there's things you don't do. I don't drink alcohol during the week. I don't go out that much during the week. I manage my energy. Even as an extrovert, I still have responsibilities. That means I don't do some things. And I'm an early bird. I'd rather wake up particularly now living near the ocean, I'd much rather be awake at 5 a.m. than be sleeping in, so to speak. And so those commitments and those determinations make some of the decisions for you. Our founders, Darren and Alison, we've been talking for the last 12 months about some of the influences that will help us, live the second half of our lives really, really well. And we've been talking, we've found a guy called Peter Attia and the Huberman Lab and a few other people like that have just got some really incredibly sensible things to say. And some of the disciplines that they've built into their world and lives have been really useful for us. And, do we default to activity versus movies? What do I do when my son says, "Dad, can I have an ice cream?" I said, "Of course you can, mate, but we're going to go for a bike ride first." And so, we did a 10K bike ride and then we got an ice cream. And so those sorts of things just become part of our way of working, and it helps a lot. And it makes a difference.
I love how you answered that question. And one of the reasons is because it's not, look, I don't eat any junk food and I don't do any of that and I exercise twice a day, 7 days a week, because it's just not realistic for the majority, like 99.999% of people. It's not realistic, nor do we want to do that. But and when you talk to or listen to people like Peter Attia and the Huberman Lab and other people like that, who this is their big bent and what they study and learn scientifically and pass on to us, and I'm incredibly grateful for, is the fact that it's not about being perfect. It's not about not doing anything like that. It's about having the balance. Okay, if I want that ice cream, okay, I've got to understand what's going to happen. So what am I going to do to counter that, to make sure that I've put myself in the right position? It's not about the 7 days a week, 3 to 5 days a week. That's how you do your exercise. You've just changed to doing some weights and resistance type of training with, as you know, as we get older, we need that more and more. Now, a lot of people pull back from that, but we actually need it more and more as we get older. And I love your answer to that question. And hopefully some of the listeners and viewers are going to go, oh, that's a bit of a weight off my shoulder that I don't have to be perfect with this. I can still have my life and still do really well.
Yeah, I think perfection is the enemy of consistency, and I think that's more what you and I are looking for. And I would say, Kingsley, following you and seeing your choices and the decision that you're making around the business that you're building, you're actually integrating those things into your life and world really, really well. I see your videos in the morning and talking about while you're doing some form of exercise, which means which means you've got up early, which means you've got out. And, again, for me, one thing that works for me is I try and do everything the night before. Yeah. I get my clothes out for the next day. I get my gym clothes out, or I get my surfboard out. And I am a terrible surfer, but I love it. I love it. But if I get those things out, it does something to your mindset around your commitment. And I love that. And I find that really, really helpful.
100%. And that's what you just said. Again, you're getting some great nuggets here that could have easily been missed. But what you're doing is you're planning and you're building habits in. And if there's one thing we stress enormously at Tomorrow Is Not Today, is that fact of build the habits in, put your preparation in, so those things become a habit, not something you've got to try and get up. Because at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's cold outside, it's dark, your blankets are on. You don't want to think about what you've got to do. But if you've got everything done before, it's already, you just get up, get changed, and boom, away you go. It's nice and easy. It's just little things like that that can make the world of difference as to whether you actually do get out and do it or not.
It's the James Clear idea of falling to the level of our system. And the lower the friction, the better. And so, I find that really, really helpful. I mean, I may be at the obsessive end of town on this, but I have because I travel for work and we're able to travel again, I've got my bag that I travel for work is already half packed. It stays half packed. It's got separate toiletries. It's got separate clothing and things that stay only in that bag. And so it reduces the amount of time that I have to take to go and do things. And short trips is this, one pair of shoes. Longer trips is 2 pairs of shoes, and the second pair of shoes I've got to be able to wear to the gym. All these sorts of silly things that I'm sure lots of people do. But those are the things that actually help me with consistency, and those are the things that actually help me with those almost predetermined decisions.
Yes.
Reading before scrolling, those sorts of things that you do, and you get the reward from the habit. You get the reward from the experience, and that's the thing that motivates you intellectually or motivates you mentally, but it also motivates you physically.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And going on that, where you talked about it motivates you mentally, obviously mental health has become a big, big issue at the moment, and it's just growing. Out in your travels, working with leaders in some very large businesses and leadership at different levels, and also some smaller businesses, probably is the best way to put it. What are you finding is happening out there for a lot of people? What suggestions do you offer to help with that, not just with the leaders themselves, but actually their teams as well at this stage?
There's probably 3 parts to the response I'd give you on that one, Kingsley. The first is I think we've got to recognise the impact of the last few years. We're both recording this in Australia. I'll almost certainly be sure that people from international, locations will be listening to it. And we've got to remember that, the world's coming out of a pandemic. Now, as far as mental health, the impact of those parts of the country that were in lockdown for significant periods of time was quite noticeable. And, in the interest of transparency, I was one of them. So the last quarter of 2021, I personally hit a wall around focus and motivation. And I took myself off to a naturopath to have a conversation with them about the chemical makeup of my body and my sense of self. Like, if there was a day that I didn't have an appointment, sometimes, Kingsley, I did nothing that day. I did nothing productive that day because I was just stuck in a bit of a wheel. My head was a bit foggy, and I just wasn't really sure, which way was up. And what was going on at that point wasn't that I was feeling any sort of sense of decline or regression in my mental health. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I was regressing, but I've been fortunate. Mental health's never been a really big challenge for me, other than I've been more aware of it in the last 5 years. So working with the naturopath really righted the chemical imbalance that was in me, and that had a really, really big impact. And so I feel like from that situation, looking at the fact that we're in a post-pandemic world now, we get to look at people's mental health and ask them about it with a lot more empathy, a lot more compassion, and even more of a commitment to how we can build the rhythms and rituals that keep us going. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be you've got to be vigilant about how people are leading themselves and where that's taking them. Now, there's no doubt there are people in our world that face mental health challenges, and we need to be respectful and responsive and supportive of those situations. That would be the first thing. Then I'd say there's probably a group of people that don't really know how to prepare, perform, and recover. Prepare, perform, and recover. And that's the challenge, I think, for a large group of people in the workforce. How do we get ready to do something? How do we leave it all on the paddock, so to speak? And then how do we recover afterwards? And being really deliberate about the rhythms in a team and supportive and respectful of people. Hey, you've just had a really big week. We know that you're going to spend the next 2 to 3 days in recovery mode. We'll support you with that. And again, having that conversation, knowing how to have it, and then supporting each other in it is really quite significant. The third thing I'd say.
Sorry.
Go on, jump in. Yeah.
I was just going to say, what you're saying there is this isn't any easy ride through, I've just got I'm a manager in an organization somewhere. You're talking about really being very intentional about every aspect of your personal life and having a good overview of your team that you're leading and where they're situated and how to work with them specifically, both individually as a leader and as a corporate team. That's quite intense.
Well, it's very purposeful, and it also, and you're right, but it also requires a layer of skill, but also, Kingsley, I'd suggest a layer of humility. We don't know everybody's world and situation. We don't know everybody's stories. They don't want to tell us those all the time, but we do need to keep our eyes and our ears attentive to how people might be going. And has there been a behavioural change? Has there been an attitudinal change? Do we in our organisation have a way of having those conversations? And if the person's not comfortable with it, what do we do? If the person is comfortable with it, what do we do? Like, these are, I think over the years, what I've learned in leadership is that if I don't know, just ask. And ask with good intent, ask with curiosity, ask with good character, but just ask. Because the longer you lead, the more you know in a small area, the less you know in other areas. So just ask.
So, and you find that most people don't mind being asked the questions?
I find most people feel relieved that somebody's paying attention to them. Most people feel relieved that a team can come up with a way. And it's, in a sense, it's psychological safety. They can come up in a way that shares their vulnerability without having to pay for it.
Yeah.
And I think when a team knows how they do that, when a team responds to that, I think that's a good thing. And I think being able to navigate towards that. And our experience is teams, when they're facilitated appropriately, they can collaborate and co-create the answers to that. They really can. And it becomes helpful, important. And I know it's not true for everyone. And sometimes HR or people in culture get involved and all these sorts of things. But when you're talking about being a team, committed to each other and committed to our way of working in our performance, then being attentive to how each other's going is really, really important. Checking in on how people might be thinking or feeling, really, really important. And building the skill set that is curious but not controlling.
So it sounds like what you're doing there is, as a leader doing that would, I imagine, flow through onto the rest of the team, because they would be watching, going right back to the beginning of the podcast, they would be watching what you're doing and taking their cues from that as to how to relate, which sets a culture. I know we're sort of getting off a little bit, but that sets a culture for the organization, which makes leadership, I guess, a little bit easier then.
Yeah, no, I actually think you're right. And kudos to you for the observation. The first thing is, does the leader have the skill set and are they modeling it? The second thing is, have we built this into the team way of working? That's why I asked the question, if it went wrong and you were responsible for it going wrong, like, what would happen? Because it lets them share a bit of their vulnerability, or share a bit of their fear, or share a bit of their areas for growth. And as soon as they've told me that, we deepen the level of trust. If I was to support you in a certain way, what would that look like? If I was to hold you to account in a certain way, what would that look like? When we know how to have those conversations, we can model it as a leader, but we can also build it in to the culture of the team. And that's where we start to see a really profound return on investment, if you will, because when everybody knows how to do it, we get a better result from each other.
So if I can summarize, because we're getting close to the end, I'm loving this conversation so much. I could go on forever, but if I can summarize from what I've gained out of it, and very briefly, obviously there's a lot more to it, but basically it's almost like you've got to, as a leader, you've got to find the resources and the solutions to be able to reach where you're going to. To do that, you've got to work on yourself, have yourself in the right physical and mental and emotional frame of mind in order to be able to observe other people, see where they're at, and see how you can care and lead them into wherever you're taking the organization. What have I missed there?
No, I think I have a belief. All leadership starts with self-leadership, and self-leadership starts with self-awareness. So I think we could take your summary and slot the pieces of the conversation into one of those three areas. And then, as I said earlier, leaders prioritize getting better in the things that matter. So we've got to be able to work out what isn't going to get our attention and what is. And there is no doubt that one of the more important things that has inspired this podcast is, how are you going as a leader? What are you doing as a human, as an individual, as a person that is investing into your tomorrow? And then, because we can't fill from an empty cup, Kingsley, we've got to understand that self-management, self-leadership is not selfish. And, I think your summary nailed it. It's as long as I understand that I then go and I give myself, my leadership, my skills to the people and the organization that I'm responsible to as much and as best as I can, then I think we build that sort of momentum that sees us wind upward, which is a powerful way of being.
Yes. No, that's awesome. Just as we come to the end, a couple of questions I love to ask people. Number one, what books/podcasts are you reading, listening to at the moment?
I'm reading, is it Robert Greene's book, Mastery, at the moment? That's fantastic. Adam Grant's book, Think Again, is also fantastic as well. And I've just got in the mail Peter Attia's new book, so I'm looking forward to that. My friend Shane Hatton wrote a book called Let's Talk Culture. And it's based on research, and it's a stunning read as well. So I'm leaning into that really fresh take on culture as well. So that probably books, podcasts. I'm enjoying the How I Got There by the Australian Financial Review, or How I Built This podcast. Really enjoy that. Short and sweet. It's almost a case study in each one as well. I've been listening to Adam Grant on his podcasts as well, and Ryan, the Stoic Leader. Was it Ryan Hawke? He's the whole kind of ideal, Ryan Holiday, the whole idea of thinking through how we're actually being as a leader as well. So they're quite influential. And where my head was going as I was answering that, I just got introduced to a true crime podcast, and I've never listened to true crime before. And it's like somebody's reading you an audiobook. So it's called In the Red Clay, and it's about the Dixie Mafia in the 60s, and it's fascinating. I'm one of those guys that watches that. And I'm also, Kingsley, I'll finish with this, diving big time into just what AI is doing. So a lot of TED Talks and YouTube and various other things around.
Yeah, it's certainly, I think, as a leader or any organization, you need to start getting into that, because it's, in 12 months' time, we'll be in a completely different world in all reality. It's moving so fast right now. So, yeah, no, that's really, really good. That great ideas, great resources there. We'll actually make sure that we follow through on those. Now, at Tomorrow's Not Today, we talk a lot about creating the ultimate tomorrow, because that's what it is. Create the life that you want. So what to you is the ultimate tomorrow?
We should have asked this question at the start. It's sort of a philosophical question in so many ways. I'm not a believer in the ultimate tomorrow is lying on a beach with someone bringing me drinks.
Good. Neither am I.
I don't mind when that happens,
Yeah.
but that's, I just sort of think that's a little shallow in some ways.
Yeah.
The ultimate tomorrow for me is where the allocation of my time and energy has meaning. So my next 26 years being married to Megan has meaning. My daughter is an adult in 5 years, and it feels like, as you know, I've got adult kids. It feels like it's gone quick, and and she's a very strong, independent young lady. So I imagine life will take her somewhere quite significant quite early. And that's so. What's the meaning in that? The next phase of our relationship and the kids, and then the nature of the work that I do. I like working. I like the structure of work. I love the work I do, and I think for me, the ultimate tomorrow would probably be wrapped up in the word meaning. And
Love it. No, that's absolute gold. And I must say my values and things definitely, we've never talked about this specifically, but definitely align exactly with what you're talking about. And the reality is, scientifically, that's what makes us happiest. Strangely enough, it's not lying on the beach. Like I said, don't mind if it happens, but what you talked about is actually what makes us the happiest. So last question in regards to that as well, how do we create that?
I use a phrase that I use with everybody, Kingsley, and I look at it. I've used it for 25, maybe even 30 years. I can't even remember where I learned it, but it was, what do I need to start doing? What do I need to stop doing? And what do I need to keep doing? And so I've got those three questions. We use in our work at PT, we use an identity question, which is, who do I need to be right now? Who do I need to be as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a friend, as a CEO? Who do I need to be? So I combine those two questions. And then I actually, I did this later, but I bring it earlier into the convo now. I actually tell someone about it, so I'm accountable. And then I make step changes. So it's not about getting all the way to the precipice and drastically changing. I don't need to do that in my life right now, but I make step changes. And so you build the habit of preparation the night before, every second day at the gym. Those times out in nature or creation or however you look at it. But I would say that it's the incremental introduction of things that will serve my future and the disciplined removal of things that won't, and some kind of accountability around that is probably the most rhythmic and human and helpful for me.
Every one of those are very intentional aspects. There's nothing cruisy about that. But again, like you said, if you want to be the leader, if you want the ultimate tomorrow, it's what you got to do, which is fantastic. Rohan, where's the best place people can find you? Social, internet?
The best place for work is LinkedIn, and it's either at Rohan Dredge. There's not many of us, or at pragmatic thinking. And we can put my email in the notes with the podcast, Rohan at pragmaticthinking.com.
Yep.
I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. I've drawn the limit at that for my social platforms. I'm either too old or too couldn't be bothered around some of the others. I'm sure when the kids are all on Snapchat, I'll be on Snapchat. But I'm not there yet. But yeah, LinkedIn and email and our website, Pragmatic Thinking.
Perfect. We'll have links to all of that in the show notes as well. Rohan, thank you so much. There was some absolute gold there, and not just one or two bits, all the way through. Very practical things, which is what I love, that people can go away and be reflective of and proactively input into their life and their organizations as well. So thank you so much for being on the Tomorrow's Not Today podcast.
A huge privilege, Kingsley. Thanks for having me.